Hello, and welcome to a brief overview of some of the required competencies for success in the 21st century. My name is Bill Hewitt, and I am Professor Emeritus at Valdosta State University and Adjunct Professor at Capella University. When the economic context in developed countries such as Europe and the United States changed from one based primarily on agriculture to one based on industry in the latter half of the 19th century, it required parents, educators, and policymakers to make dramatic changes in preparing children and youth for successful adulthood. A change of this magnitude is considered a phase change, much like water changing from a solid to a liquid at room temperature and to steam when boiled. A similar change occurred in the latter half of the 20th century as the economy changed from one based on industry to one based on the digitization of information and the increased use of computers to process that information. Most would agree that the rapidly changing global socio-cultural milieu that humanity is experiencing requires careful consideration when engaged in a discussion of the attributes and skills needed to prepare children and youth for the 21st century, and this has been an ongoing issue for several decades. However, it is equally true that there are issues related to developing human potentials that have not changed, especially those related to the domains of cognition and thinking, affect in managing emotions, agency, and the ability to create plans and socializing with others. At the same time, there are challenges in each of these domains that need to be systematically developed for adult success in a rapidly changing environment. While the Brilliant Star framework highlights some of these relatively unchanging human capacities, it can also be used to organize thinking about specific competencies required for the current rapidly changing environment. For example, in the cognitive domain, we have already discussed the importance of creative and critical thinking needed for the problem-solving and decision-making challenges that are essential in a rapidly changing environment. Additionally, as a result of people interacting with a diverse set of civic and work groups, people need to understand different ethnicities, religions, languages, and cultures, and how that might impact one's thinking. People also need to develop what has been labeled as a glocal mindset, in that they need to think about the local community in which they live, while also considering the impact of their actions in a larger global context. The world is becoming increasingly connected, and what happens in one part of the world can quickly impact one's local community. Another important cognitively oriented skill is an understanding of the difference between linear and exponential change. Linear change is how human beings live their lives, especially in adulthood. A change in one year is about equal to change in any other year. However, exponential change is something altogether different. Change may look linear for some period of time, but then the rate of change becomes dramatically accelerated. An example is to imagine a pond with one lily pad on the first day that doubles each day until it is completely covered in 30 days. The lilies in the pond are barely noticeable for most of the month. It is only one quarter covered on day 28 and fully covered on day 30. That is, it took 24 or 25 days for the lilies to be noticed, and then 5 or 6 days for the pond to be completely covered. This can be seen in two graphs showing the adoption speed of new technologies. For example, running water was available for centuries before it was adopted by at least 80% of households in the USA. Other examples include the widespread adoption of the telephone that took almost 80 years, the extensive use of air conditioning that took about 50 years, and the adoption of the clothes dryer that took around 40 years. However, with the movement to the digital age, adoption rates are even faster. Widespread use of the internet took about 20 years, cell phone use took less than 15 years, podcasting took about 10 years, and use of the tablet about 5 years. Most recently, the large language model ChatGPT reached an active user base of 100 million in only 2 months. This was even faster than the adoption rates of Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter that had set previous records. This leads to another cognitively oriented skill set that of curiosity and an orientation towards innovation. Today's schooling systems are focused on developing knowledge that can be assessed using standardized paper-pencil tests. But that is an incomplete orientation if the objective is preparing young people to be creative and innovative. Maker labs and design-oriented curriculum may be better at developing those skills. In the domain of conation and agency, there is a need to create one's goals, set plans, and identify one's intentions in order to adapt to a rapidly changing environment. There's a need to learn, identify changes in the environment, unlearn thinking and behavioral patterns that no longer work, and then relearn new concepts and skills. This places an emphasis on developing skills related to self-determination and self-regulation rather than simply following directions developed by others. In the social domain, there's a need to develop skills associated with group-based problem-solving and decision-making. Quite often, the wisdom of the group develops better alternatives and solutions than does that of any one individual. This does not mean that individual competence is not important, but rather that skills in working in groups need to be incorporated into the developed competencies. An important component in working in groups is that of listening to others and sharing one's own ideas. In the affective domain, there is a need to develop a set of personally determined values that can guide one's thinking and behavior. There is also a need to identify an activity or set of activities that one can approach with enthusiasm and zeal. That brings joy to one's life and allows one to meet the challenging times more easily. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, in the domain of moral character, one needs to develop such virtues as truthfulness, trustworthiness, and integrity. It is difficult to develop a good reputation, and even more difficult to repair it after engaging in blameworthy behavior. In summary, we live in rapidly changing times that are likely to become more volatile as human beings are confronted with challenges not previously experienced. Most importantly, there is no single set of intellectual or academic skills that can prepare children and youth to successfully meet these challenges. Rather, there is a set of attributes and skills covering multiple domains of human development that need to be addressed. And if that is to be done successfully, there is a need to focus on a holistic approach to human development in the learning and educational processes rather than on a slim subset of academic knowledge.